Go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Feed Your Soul with Kim podcast. I'm Kim McLaughlin, your host, and I have a special guest today. Michele Mariscal is a friend of mine. I think I've known her 8 years, like a lot of years. We've been in groups together and masterminds. We've spent time together. So I'm so happy she is here. We were just talking about her background, and she has a background of moving from science to spirit. Well, we're going to have to find out what that all is about. And she has a master's degree in kinesiology. She is here talking about grief, and that is her specialty. Obviously, kinesiology, spirit, food, grief, they're all connected. And we're going to get to know more of that today. Michele, welcome. If you could just give us an intro, a little bit more about who you are and what you do, that would be super helpful.
Sure. Thank you, Kim. And hi, everybody. It's great to be here with you. This is not a thing you might hear very often, but I love to talk about grief. I think it's so important to talk about it, to bring it out of the shadows, because as you'll hear a little bit from my life, boy, did I try to keep it in the shadows and hide it and avoid it and try to get out of it any way I could. So my background, just educationally, I was a sciencey geek. I loved studying cell biology. And then while I was in school, I was way back in the day an aerobics instructor and personal fitness trainer. So I was finding that people were unlocking parts of themselves through this physical activity. And I was also very physical. So what the heck, I got a degree in that too. So I could look professional and do more work and be more credible and be able to provide more of the science behind movement. And then as I continued to work with people and really recognized all of the emotional and spiritual life that is a part of who we are when we're moving around, then that really opened myself up to wanting to know more from an educational standpoint of esoteric philosophy, hermetic science. So it all ties together. Any of you who might have read Bruce Lipton's Biology of Belief and his other work, it all has meaning in our bodies, in our psyches. And so how I find that it ties together is just conversationally with different clients, things may come up, and finding the grief recovery. I'll go ahead in and talk about how I found the grief work. I am a specialist with the grief recovery method, which I had never heard about. It's been around for 40 years now. Mm-hmm. And it's the first evidence-based program that in a very quick amount of time provides the action steps to allow us to get out of our head and into our heart to be able to process these very challenging emotions. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine me using education as a way to get along in the world. I was very oriented in my intellect and mm-hmm. head.
In your head.
And yeah, and so when losses just kept piling up, my head finally wasn't working well enough. I literally said, I don't know what happened to a part of my brain. I can't even decide if I want salmon or chili for dinner. Like, that's how bad.
I mean, while you were going through the grief process, your brain wasn't able to function, and that's what you come to rely upon. My brain isn't telling me even what to eat. We have a problem, right?
Yes, Houston, we have a problem. So yes, so that and I had certainly done work with grief groups, a psychologist, which was helpful at another time in my loss history. But this time I just continued to seek out. I knew I was looking for something. And so when I found this program, what appealed to me is that it was the thing that had a bit of a linear process to it,
Yeah.
but also allowed me to drop in and be able to say everything that I am experiencing with losses. Yeah.
It's like that. It's when you talk about this, it strikes me as the idea of that mind body connection. That one way we can notice is if our head, if we're tend to be more in the intellect in our head, and then something happens and we try and stay in our head, but it just isn't seeming to work. We feel off, we feel off balance. And one of the things you talked about is like food comes into play. Is that what you're saying? I think is that we have to end up having that mind body connection, that is a way to move through that grief process.
Yeah, it's and thank you for saying that, because one of the things that I found is that it was almost like I was trying to get out of my body. The emotions
Yes.
that I was experiencing were so convoluted. It was like a big knot of rubber bands,
Yeah.
and so challenging that I didn't know how to pull them apart. So there was a time in my life when I was exercising 3 to 4 hours a day. And I had also during that time developed bulimia, which I kind of just kept passing off. Like,
Mm.
and this was again back in the late 80s when we weren't talking about any of this stuff. So it was kind of a secret, but I also didn't have a sense of anything was wrong. Like I mean, I knew something was wrong on some level, but I was just trying to get through the day and be functional and do my job really well. I was used to being very competent, but something was wrong in my relationship, and there was loss starting to
Yes.
happen there.
Can I just back us up a little bit? I
Sure.
just was thinking that it would be helpful if we knew, what is your definition of grief? What does that mean? Because
Yeah.
I'm thinking we're talking about it. I assume everybody knows, but let's just catch everybody up and make sure we're all on the same page about what the definition is.
Sure. Yeah. So grief is the normal and natural reaction to loss of any kind. And the reason I say that is because if you think about it, we can just count on our hands. There's probably over 40 different kinds of losses, some of them intangible.
Yeah.
Some we may have been experiencing more in these last years, loss of safety, loss of trust, those kinds that give us kind of that anxiety in our body. And of course, everybody typically, when we think of grief, we go to loss of a loved one, loss of an intimate relationship. But it is important to remember that all of these other kinds of losses that we are experiencing, financial, job loss, career change, all of those, we liken it to having a backpack. So when you're a kid, you get your little backpack, you're about 2 or 3 years old, you might sustain your first loss. Maybe your pet runs away. That's like putting a little rock in your backpack. So
Mm.
when we've gotten to be an adult, if we have not had those tools to process and pull those little rocks out, that backpack is very heavy. So back to the definitions: normal and natural reaction to loss that just creates this emotional challenge. And the other one that's really important also is loss is grief is when we experience a change or an end in any familiar pattern. So that one I think is so dismissed, because let's think about this time of year, September. Kids, there's a lot of people that are experiencing empty nest and or change in school, like from elementary to these
Yeah.
transitions. And so that's an end and a change. So there may be these little rumblings in us, inside of us, that we're not paying attention to, that would be good to just pull up and maybe have a tear, a good cry about, oh, my child is getting older, my child left, who am I now? All that around role identity.
Well, it's interesting because you're talking about normal and natural reaction to a loss of something and not necessarily someone. And you said a change in any familiar pattern, like the way we do things is interrupted and is like, uh-oh, what do we do? And that it's like the way I'm thinking of it, the way you're talking about it is like we could even, I love the idea of a 10 scale, right? It's a 1, like it's so little, it's little, it doesn't feel so, and then there's the 10, and like we have to also imagine like where I am in grief, like how big is the grief to me. And also, I'm sure you'll agree with me on this one, is that my reaction to a situation causing me grief, the same situation, you probably will have a different response and a different level of grief than I do. If the dog gets lost, right? Or the dog passes, the dog dies. And my level of grief might be really different than yours to the same situation. And that we have to honor that I might have a different reaction than what I notice others have. And like that's still normal, natural process of a loss.
Yes, and that's a lot of the education, the educational part of the grief recovery method is helping us understand how to be not only with ourselves, but with others. And that what you were just talking about is the number one thing, recognizing that even if my mom died and my friend's mom died, and I'm wanting to console her, to say something like, "Oh, I know how you feel," we might want to just pause a minute and choose a different way of consoling, because in truth that can't be, because her relationship with her mom is what it is, and my relationship with my mom is what it is. So that's one of the critical things, and a part of really why grief can be so isolating and push us into some of these unhealthy ways of dealing with it, because when we get these we can hear a lot of different comments that some of them may be intellectually true, but they're not helpful in the moment. Let me give you an example of intellectual true comments. So the very first loss that I sustained was my brother, who was younger than I, died. He was 28 and I was 31. And at the funeral, one of his friends said to me, "Well, at least you still have two other brothers." And I, uh, uh, I was speechless. I understood
Wow.
and I knew this person, but it wasn't helpful at all. And so,
Yeah.
we can understand how we start retreating and why it becomes challenging to be with the emotions, because we're getting um, a lot of things that are not helpful.
It's interesting. It makes me think about the whole time we've gone through with that, the 3 years of that, the pandemic crisis that's gone on, and that everybody's level of grief around that was really different, very individual. And the comments of you shouldn't feel that way, or this isn't that, or whatever the thing is, it doesn't honor that the person is experiencing something that is different than yours. And it requires us moving into empathy, right? Of, wow, that seems really hard for you. This, what
Yes.
can I do for you? How could I help you with this? I hear that you're upset. Really just being with them and their grief. And so that's one thing I have. And the other thing I thought of is I really love the visual of the backpack and the pebble and the pebble and the pebble. I have had, I've worked in lots of places as a clinical director, psychotherapist, all the things. And what I noticed is that with our staff is that I used to work with homeless, mentally ill people, and they would, every 3 months, somebody would die. I mean, it just kind of like, it just was the nature of the game. And it was, and which is sad because of lots of other issues that went on that created that system. But what would happen for the staff is and what happened for me is that somebody that I wasn't necessarily really close to, I would have more of a grief reaction than others. And it was fascinating to watch this happen among the people. And it made me think of what you just talked about with that pebbles in the back. And that I always thought, this isn't about this person right here, because we don't really know them that well. I mean, they're not my family. They're a person I worked with, but that it's that pebbles in the back. And I was thinking that is that unresolved grief. Is that what you would call that? And can you talk about what that is? What is it? And then how do we notice it? And maybe what could we do with it? And I know
Sure.
those are big questions, and we don't have
Yeah.
all day, but like those, to me, I find that they come up where something happens and I have this grief reaction. Somebody died that I didn't really know. It's like, wow, I'm feeling really upset. Something's up with those pebbles in my backpack.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's interesting because something just occurred in the last couple days. I always say my life is fodder. And I think it was to help prepare to have an example for just this question because it surprised me the level of emotion that I had. So talking about unresolved grief, how do we know? One of the biggest things is if, as we said, grief is the normal and natural reaction to loss. And what we do see, however, though, is if memories come up, it's very natural and normal for a memory to come up and maybe some sadness around it. How we can tell we're still in unresolved grief is if that memory takes us then down a dark alley and we start shutting down more, and we just begin to recognize I haven't left the house for 2 days, and or we move into those soothing behaviors, either immediately, opening the bottle of wine and just becoming unconscious to what's welling up. When you have done the work and have been able to process a relationship to loss, to grief, you can have, what happens is that memory comes up and then it just waves. And the next thing, an example in my life, especially with my dad, he was such a funny guy. A moment of sadness will arise, and I'll just be with that sadness and just acknowledge him. And right behind that, having allowed my emotion to be something, another memory of him being silly or joking around with me will come up. So that's kind of how we can tell is when these memories arise, what is the aftermath? Does it
Oh,
really
oh,
take
oh.
us down?
So, oh, I see. So it's not the memory itself that can be
Mhm.
fine. It's
Yeah,
the what happens afterwards. So
yeah,
if we go into drinking, right? I mean, that would be something to check yourself on. Smoking of whatever the thing is, right? Eating and they feel gambling, sex, porn.
yeah,
I mean, I'm
yeah.
like, these are all the things that happens to distract us from the feeling of the grief. And also the thing you said, um the memory leads you into a dark alley. I thought that was a visual I could totally get, like, and that it goes dark or you're staying home. That so it's okay to have the memory, it's okay to have
Absolutely.
the recollection. That's fine, normal
Yeah,
process of grief and loss. But it's then what happens to us, mind, body, spirit afterwards, and then recognizing it so we can then move to a different spot. Am I getting it?
right. Yes, yes. And how that works is when you're able to process in whatever way you're doing the work, you're you're getting the tools to process the emotions. What you're really able to do is we talk about grief as unresolved grief as being related to unmet expectations, hopes, dreams, and expectations, anything that lies in that realm, a life cut short that you would have wanted more.
Mhm.
If it's our elder, wishing we had done something better, different, or more of, there's all these, those 6 different areas. So things we wanted to do better, different, or more,
Mhm.
or things, hopes, dreams, and expectations that are unmet. And we can have these little emotional communications in us that until we're able to discover what those are and have a way to process those, that's when those memories, those sad memories come up. That's when they can really just take us take us in, and because we're still attached to them. Once we've been able to discover and process, then we have completed that relationship to the pain
Yeah.
that those things were causing.
So
So
then it wouldn't, I'm sorry, so it wouldn't be heavy on our back, right?
pebble,
It would be,
right?
they
The
would just
pebble,
kind of, the thing would surround us. I don't,
yeah,
whatever your kind of image is of like, oh, there's that thing. Oh, oh yeah, that was that. And that was that, but it doesn't weigh heavy on our back. And so that's
right,
what we want, is it just kind of to be, the memories can come back and go, oh yeah, there it is. Oh, okay. But it doesn't feel heavy. Am I getting
right.
it?
Right, yes. And when you have again learned and worked with those things that you would have wanted better, different, or more, when you've processed all that, as that memory comes up, if it's a little bit related to that, you recall, yes, yes, and here's another little thread of that. So let me just be with that. And we've learned how to be with that. It's not in the shadow
And
anymore.
so it's being with it without being distracted during it, correct? Like the
Right.
alcohol, the smoking,
Letting it
the
be.
food, right?
Yeah.
So it's being with it.
So there's my example. So what just happened 2 days ago, I was a huge fan of the Big Bang Theory. And that show started right when my marriage ended and I moved out, and I found it such solace. Well, I had never, you know how the shows bop around. I had never seen the last 2 or 3 seasons, but I was finally catching up and watching the end. I know it ended a couple of years ago. The last show came on, it's ending, and I'm finding inside myself tears are starting to well up. And I'm like, this is so silly. I mean, I know it's a sentimental, Sheldon finally gets his Nobel and he's having a sentimental moment, but no, it's not that. There's something else. What's going on? What's going on? I'm just crying these big tears and realizing that there was a little bit, there was still a little bit in there around my marriage ending. And it took me right to that. And I was just being with, and I just let it flow. And then it was sort of like, it was like this, like, whew,
Wow.
that was
That's
a good cry,
powerful. I
unexpected.
I actually, thank you for this, because you are connecting me with things like when there is an ending of a show, I can think of it as like, oh, and like, what is that sadness about? It's the show. What is the, like, kind of like the way I think of it is, what is it triggering in me about me or my life? What is it? Because it's not about that, the show, right? It's about what is it triggering within me. And that's what you're talking about, is like, what is that? It's asking that question. Am I correct? Like, what's going on
Yeah.
for me about this?
Yes, how was it feeding me? What was I receiving emotionally from this content? And what was it related to what was happening in my life at these
Yeah.
times?
So
Yeah,
could you, I don't want to leave people. So we've talked, I had lots of notes of things I wanted to ask, questions I want to ask you, but it feels to me like I don't want to end and not have something for people to do, because, talking about the grief can like
stir it
recapitulate,
up.
or
Yeah,
it brings it up. And like,
it does.
I don't want to leave people with that and I don't want to go really long because I mean, my God, we could go over so many things. So what I hear is maybe one suggestion is when you have this kind of grief reaction, wanting to do one of those kind of distracting behaviors is like, what was I receiving? What was coming into me, and kind of what's coming up for me in the process of whatever happened is show ending. I love that. I just love that because I'm not, you're not the only one that that's happened to with the show. And like, what does this mean for me? So what could you give a few tips for people, if they start noticing stuff coming up, what could they do?
Sure. Yeah. And, the one of the other pieces of work that I do is with heart math. And I just find because our heart has this immense capacity to hold us, that's kind of how I think of it.
Mhm.
Um, One of the great things to do, because it can feel really anxiety provoking when these feelings are coming up, is just to like imagine them just being in your hand. Just keep asking what, because there's really a fear, a lack of safety maybe
Yeah.
that someone is feeling, and just bringing that, literally bringing your hands to your heart and just holding that, and know that your heart has the capacity to just, we call it a heart soak. So we're just going to soak in the heart, just really
So for
let
those
it.
of you that are and everybody watching on YouTube, you can see what we're doing. But so it's just your two hands cupped over each other, and you're saying visualize that grief situation, the feelings in there. We don't have to name it correctly. It's just visualizing it. If it doesn't have words, then it could just be there,
Yes,
right?
yes. And that sometimes that's part of the anxiety, is people are trying to figure it out. Notice that's
Yes.
our head trying
Head,
to solve it.
right.
Just let that go. Just be with, oh gosh, this feels heavy. Let me just do a heart soak. That's one. Um, the other that I really love, because we have been through so much trauma, all of us together, through those years of pandemic, the butterfly hug is one that I recommend all over the place, all the time. And you can, those of you listening, you can go to YouTube and visually see how to do that. But that butterfly hug is that alternating tapping with our hands.
So we have our hands in kind of a butterfly position on our chest, and
Yep,
you tap one hand, then the other, one hand, then the other.
yep.
Oh my gosh.
And that taps into some of the work, if any of you have done work with EMDR.
Yes.
Yeah, it helps. It just kind of switches the brain. It switches back and forth. It has a way, this is the science. I do not understand the full science. I just know it works. It's very calming because of this switching. It allows the emotional content to just kind of calm a bit. And then the third thing, if people feel prepared and ready, the grief recovery method is, I have found it to be enormously healing and helpful. So if you feel ready to process and want that process way of being in a group or in coaching, that also is work that I do.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. So I love that. So for anybody listening, the heart soak, so coming into your heart with your hands uh together in a together, butterfly hug, and then the grief recovery method, because I think we have to honor that sometimes we can't, a podcast isn't going to be enough. There's deep grief, and y'all out there who have that know that that's going on, and I think you'll know more now since we've talked about it. And I think we have to honor that if people are deep in grief, go get help.
Yeah.
There are people, Michelle, other people, but it's really go get help. There is a way out of it. I just always think of the people that are suffering with whatever feelings coming up. Like there is somebody that can help you move through it. So I want to make sure I give you time. Michele, how could people get a hold of you? How can they find out more about you and get in on the grief recovery method?
Sure. They can find me at my website, and my website is EnergyM, the word energy, m.org. And if you go to resources, there's a tab for free ebooks. I have several different grief topics that you can go and get a free ebook there. And you can also see services there as well. So,
And also you have your book. Can you
and I
tell them
have,
about your book?
you'll
I have your book, so there you go.
website, yes, my book Growing Through Grief. And that is that is something that I know for myself. The challenges that are brought to me really are brought for me. Some of you may know that
Yes.
philosophy. I truly do believe that, and have grown a lot through my own grief, with a lot of help from many different people, places, things, spiritual beings. Yeah, I call it a buffet. When we're doing grief work, it's a buffet.
Okay.
Pull in all that you feel serves you, and
Yeah.
you know what that will be.
Nice. So I will link all of that, your book, your website, your opt-in, we'll link all of that in the show notes. This is really important work, everyone. This is, if you're noticing that you have pebbles in your backpack, that it feels heavy and you just don't even know what it's about, or loss is happening and you're staying home a lot, you're engaging in any of those distracting kind of behaviors, it's really important to get help, because there's a way to move through it to where the next time around, you won't have more pebbles in your backpack. You'll feel more free and more open, because we deal with loss often, daily. I mean, something different is changing on a daily basis, not the big losses, but there is loss and grief often. Michele, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. This is important information that people really need to know, and I'm so glad you came here to talk to us about it.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I was happy to be here with you and your audience.
Thank you. Bye, guys. We'll talk to you later.